A restaurant, half full, low light, the kind of place with candles that never quite stay lit. Sarah is 34. She has checked her reflection 3 times in the last 10 minutes, though nothing about it has changed. Somewhere across the room, a man she has never met is deciding where to sit. He glances at his phone, then at the door, then back at his phone again. The small choreography of someone else's nerves. She hasn't spoken to him yet, but she already knows how tonight will go. She has been here before. Not in this restaurant. In this feeling. By the time she sits down across from him, she has already decided he will lose interest somewhere around dessert. That he will check his phone twice, thinking she hasn't noticed. That his goodbye will come a little too fast and a little too kind. The way people say goodbye when they're relieved it's over. None of this has happened yet, and somehow most of it will. Not because Sarah can see the future, because she's about to walk straight into an evening she has already written the ending to. Convictions like hers rarely stay quiet. They get up, they cross their arms half a second too early. They laugh at the wrong moment, just to check if it landed. They shape the very night they claim to be predicting. So here is the question this film is really about. Not why dating is hard, or why some people struggle to trust. Something stranger and a little more unsettling. Why do the assumptions we quietly make from our lives keep arriving, almost as if they'd been ordered in advance? To find an answer, we have to go back further than psychology. Back to a small rented hall in Los Angeles, sometime in the late 1940s. A former dancer named Neville Goddard stands in front of a few dozen folding chairs. He isn't shouting. He isn't selling anything. He speaks slowly, like a man long used to being doubted and no longer minding it. A stenographer near the back takes down every word, the way people did before recorders were common, back when losing a good lecture meant losing it forever. His claim is simple and enormous. The outside world, he says, is not solid ground we walk across. It's closer to a mirror. Whatever you can sincerely assume to be true about your life, whatever feeling you can honestly settle into as already real, the world eventually rearranges itself to agree with you. Not wishing, not hoping, assuming. People kept coming back to hear him say it. It isn't hard to understand why. He was offering something most of them had never been offered before. The idea that they weren't simply living through their circumstances. They were quietly writing them. The obvious question is whether he was telling people something true or simply something they wanted to hear. It took psychology another 20 years to start answering that, without ever mentioning his name. In 1948, the same decade Goddard was lecturing in Los Angeles, a sociologist named Robert Merton was studying something that looked, at first, like ordinary bad luck. A rumor spreads that a bank is in trouble. People start gathering on the sidewalk outside. First a few, then a line stretching around the block. Nothing is actually wrong with it, but enough people believe the rumor to start withdrawing their savings, just in case. A bank that loses enough deposits fast enough will fail, whether or not anything was ever wrong with it to begin with. Merton gave this pattern a name that has outlived almost everything else he wrote: the self-fulfilling prophecy, a belief that causes the very outcome it describes, not by predicting the future, but by changing behavior in the present. This is the first real clue. Not that thoughts reach out and rearrange the world. Something smaller and just as strange. Beliefs change what we do. What we do changes what happens next. 20 years later, Two researchers found the same pattern hiding somewhere. No one expected it. An ordinary elementary school classroom. Picture an ordinary elementary school in the 1960s. Chalk dust drifting in the light from a window, rows of desks, and a teacher holding a fresh class list on the first day of the year. Psychologists Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson told a group of teachers that certain students, according to a new test, were about to bloom intellectually within the year. The list of students was fake. The names had been picked at random. By the end of the school year, many of those randomly chosen children had made real, measurable gains, more than their classmates. Nothing had changed about the children. What had changed was the teachers. Believing certain students were about to bloom, they had, without noticing it themselves, called on them more often, waited a little longer for their answers, smiled a little more when they got something wrong. None of it looked like favoritism from the inside. It looked, to the teachers, like ordinary encouragement. Later researchers, trying to repeat the study, found the effect was real, but smaller and less consistent than it first appeared. Psychologists still argue about exactly how much a teacher's private belief can shape a child's year. The direction of it, though, has rarely been in serious dispute. An assumption, held privately, had leaked out through 100 small behaviors. A classroom had quietly rearranged itself around it. To understand why this keeps happening, it helps to know one honest fact about how the brain works. It doesn't wait to see the world clearly and then decide what it means. It guesses first. It uses memory and expectation to predict what's about to happen, and only pays close attention when that guess turns out to be badly wrong. Some neuroscientists, among them Carl Friston, have spent years arguing this is the brain's basic strategy for almost everything. Not just kitchens and hallways, but other people and the future itself. Perception, in this view, is less like a camera and more like a running guess. One reality is rarely even asked to correct. Walk into your own kitchen with your eyes half closed, and you don't relearn where the counter is. Your brain already assumed it. It only corrects itself if your hand meets air instead of wood. This is what's happening to Sarah at that dinner table, whether she notices it or not. She isn't lying to herself. She's perceiving completely normally. A slightly quick glance at his phone becomes proof. A comfortable pause in conversation becomes evidence the evening is dying. British psychologist Peter Wason noticed a similar pattern in the way people reason, not just perceive. Once we favor an idea, he found, we get quietly better at noticing anything that agrees with it, and strangely worse at noticing what doesn't. Not because we're being dishonest, because that's simply what a mind holding an assumption tends to do. It goes looking for evidence, and it usually finds some. There's a reason this shows up so strongly around uncertainty, exactly the kind Sarah is sitting in right now. An unclear situation doesn't stay unclear for long inside a nervous system built to react. The brain treats it a little like a low-grade alarm, something worth resolving quickly, even if the fastest resolution on hand is only a guess dressed up as a conclusion. So far, this is a story about perception, a private, internal loop. But assumptions rarely stay private for long, especially the ones we carry into rooms with other people in them. In the late 1970s, psychologist Mark Snyder ran an experiment using nothing more than a telephone and a photograph. Before each call, a man was shown a photo. said to belong to the woman he was about to speak with. Some photos had been rated in advance as very attractive, others as fairly plain. The photos had nothing to do with the real women waiting on the line. The men who believed they'd been paired with an attractive woman spoke more warmly, more easily, a little more like themselves. The women on the other end, who had never seen any photograph at all, warmed up in response. Listening back to just their half of the recorded calls, independent judges rated those women as friendlier and more likable, based on nothing but how they'd been spoken to. A stranger's assumption, built on a photograph that wasn't even real, had changed how a woman was treated. How she was treated had changed how she actually came across. Not because anyone was pretending, because most of us, quite naturally, rise or fall to meet the way we're treated. Back at the restaurant, Sarah's carefulness is doing the same quiet work. Her guarded warmth changes the temperature of the table before either of them says a word out loud. He begins matching the same careful distance without knowing why. Neither of them chose this. Both of them are simply answering it. 2,000 years apart, two entirely different vocabularies, the same discovery made twice. Which brings us back to that rented hall in Los Angeles and a claim that has sounded for decades like something caught between comfort and fantasy. Neville Goddard was right about more than his critics have usually given him credit for. Assumption really does tend to arrive first. Reality really does seem to follow it, more often than chance alone would explain. Where he went further than the evidence can follow is the mechanism. He believed imagination directly reshapes the physical world. That consciousness is the only reality there is, and matter simply obeys it. Nothing in psychology or neuroscience supports that version of the claim. Not yet, and not in the way he meant it. That distinction matters. It's the difference between a claim that can be tested and one that can only be believed. What the research actually supports is smaller and, in its own way, just as strange. Assumption reshapes perception. Perception reshapes behavior. Behavior reshapes how other people respond to us. All of it, working together, quietly rewrites the story of a life, one unnoticed choice at a time. Not because the universe is listening, because other people are. And so, in a much narrower and much stranger sense, are we? This same quiet mechanism doesn't only build confidence, it can just as easily build a cage. Picture someone convinced, somewhere below conscious thought, that they are hard to love. They test every new relationship for the exit before anyone else can find it. They read a slow reply as disinterest, a shortened phone call as boredom. So they pull back first, just enough to feel safe, just enough, unfortunately, to make the other person feel the distance too. A message goes unanswered for 3 hours, and by hour 2, the story is already finished in their head. Eventually, the relationship ends, the way they were already sure it would. Driving home afterward, headlights sliding across a quiet road, they don't feel surprised. They feel almost calm, confirmed. They file it away as proof. Further evidence for a belief that, in a very real sense, helped write its own ending. This isn't a character flaw. It's the same ordinary mechanism running Sarah's evening, running the classroom, running that phone call from the 1970s. It simply happens to be running in a direction that hurts. Here is where this stops being simply interesting and starts being useful. If assumption really does work like a habit of mind, rehearsed quietly until it starts to feel like fact. Then it can be examined the way any habit can, not forced into false positivity, just noticed gently before it hardens into behavior. Many of these habits were built early in childhood bedrooms and school hallways most of us have long since left, then carried forward for years without ever being questioned. Most of what we call intuition about the future is memory, wearing a disguise. That's worth sitting with for a moment. The quiet confidence that a new relationship will end like the last one isn't really a prediction. It's a memory, dressed up as foresight, standing at the door of something that hasn't happened yet. Noticing that difference, even once, doesn't rewrite a life instantly. Nothing here does. But it does something almost as valuable. It puts half a second of space between the assumption and the behavior that would have made it true. Sometimes, half a second is exactly enough room for a different choice to fit. This isn't about thinking positively instead of realistically. It's about noticing which of your realistic-sounding thoughts are actually just old conclusions, replaying on a loop. Which brings us back, one last time, to the restaurant. To Sarah, sitting across from a man she has already, quietly, written an ending for. Maybe she catches it halfway through the appetizer. A small, strange thought, arriving sideways. I've decided how this goes before it's gone anywhere at all. Maybe she doesn't catch it at all, and the evening ends exactly the way she expected, and she never learns why. Either way, the mechanism doesn't care which one happens. It runs quietly, underneath attention, in bank runs and classrooms and phone calls and first dates, in a Los Angeles lecture hall and in a Stoic's notebook 2,000 years old. Neville Goddard never ran a study. He never kept a control group. But he noticed something true long before science had the tools to explain it. That most of us walk into our lives having already decided, in some quiet, unexamined corner, how they're going to go. He believed the mechanism was the universe, listening and obeying. It turns out to be smaller than that, and somehow no less remarkable. It's other people, listening and responding. It's a brain, guessing first and checking later if it checks at all. It's a habit of mind old enough that we've mistaken it for personality. None of this makes the world imaginary or turns a life into something invented from a comfortable chair. Most of what happens to us still has very little to do with us at all. But somewhere inside that larger, indifferent world, there's a smaller one, built quietly out of expectation, that answers back almost every time we speak to it. So maybe the real question was never whether you can think a new reality into existence. Maybe it's smaller than that, and a little harder to sit with. Tonight, notice one assumption before you act on it. Just one. Don't fix it. Just notice it.